There we go. Okay, so we can start whenever you're ready, Cait.
Okay,
And I'll mute myself.
wonderful. Thanks for having me, Jessica, and inviting me into this space. And thank you all that are watching this call live and anyone that will be catching it as it's recorded. I'm so grateful that you carved out a little bit of time to be here with us today. It's going to be a really kind of casual conversation about what a death doula, death midwife, death companion is. And I say it like that because we're rising in great numbers right now. And a lot of times people are finding that the term death doula may not resonate for them, and they may choose end of life doula. Sometimes death midwife is the preferred option. So I think for today in our 30 minutes together, I'll just use like an umbrella term as death worker, okay? And death doula, which is how I refer to myself, will be included within that. Death workers are a very ancient offering, skill type of human being. I think we're now hearing about it more mainstream. I saw CNN post a news article a few weeks ago about a death doula, and I thought, okay, so now the world's starting to hear a little bit more about us. And I will say too, before I get into the meat and the bones of everything, what I'm talking about today, and if we end up looking at the PowerPoint presentation that goes along with it, all of that can be emailed over to you. And so Jessica and I will figure out the best way to do that. But if you're interested in getting a printable PDF, tangible copy of my PowerPoint in regards to what a death worker is, we'll absolutely get that to you in one way or the other. I'd also love if you would follow me on Instagram, because that's where you're going to get the majority of the education as to what a death worker is and does. And as we continue to grow, what that looks like. My handle is at Cait, C-A-I-T .death doula. And kind of just an exciting thing where I'm speaking with a hospice today that I'm excited to share is that Barbara Carnes, hospice pioneer. I mean, we've all heard about her in the hospice world. She's sold over 30 million copies of her book, Gone From My Sight. And she's actually going to be coming on my platform tomorrow and speaking. So definitely follow me. She's got a lot of interest right now with working with us death workers as a hospice nurse and finding ways to get us all collectively working as a team so that we can bring this education and this better way of dying to individuals. I say better, but I want that to be like a really fluid word, okay? Different way of dying, collective. So just a few things to be mindful of coming up. But yes, follow me for all the information. I'd like to say that first and foremost, death workers are educators. We also are space holders. We are people that have found we are able and comfortable to talk about death, to hear about death, to hold space for people that are experiencing death or dying, however that looks for them. We're comfortable saying the word death. And so really our roles in society are starting to shape and form right now. This is something that hospice has been carrying for many, many years, and it's been changing throughout the decades. And now we're seeing this influx of all of us other people that may not have gotten affiliated there and are curious and wanting to hold space for people just to have these dialogues, most importantly. Because we look at the way our world is operating, and definitely the last year being in a pandemic and all that transpired with that is showing us some areas that could use some support, but ultimately we're holding that space for people to explore. And for so long, our society has just closed our eyes and really not dealt with death until it's happening in real time. And we've all seen it. It's just too late at that point. Real time is not the best time. We're making decisions, we're grieving, whether that be anticipatory grief or grief after the death. it's just not the time to prepare, plan, talk, decide, as so many people in hospice see. So many individuals don't even know all of their options around end of life. And their options are often changing, especially as we see medical aid in dying coming up in the legislation more and more often. And we've been talking in amongst my cohort about voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So some of these ancient sort of options at end of life that no, don't work for everyone, but yes, are an option nonetheless, are things that, these are just some of the topics that death workers are talking about. So yes, first and foremost, educators out in the public just about what death even is about, that we are okay to talk about death. I personally, before I got into this work, experienced my own anxiety with death and dying, and through that experience saw how unavailable resources were at that time for someone like myself that was healthy overall and had experienced a traumatic death from someone I loved, and was now starting to deal with my mortality hitting me head on. And it's like, who do you go to for that? I suppose you could talk to a therapist, certainly, but it's also nice to then have maybe a death worker come in that you could start preparing. And that was something I found personally for me with my experience. It was like, I wanted to put plans in place. I wanted an advance directive. I wanted to know where my children were going to be if I died prematurely before they were at an age to raise themselves. And those are also some things that a death worker can work with people on as well. Pre-planning, and that's huge too. That often the planning piece happens in real time, and it's wonderful to have a death worker have the ability to sort of say, hey, listen, we're here, let's create the space now before the need is even there, and let's talk about it. Also, death workers are companions at the bedside. I mean, this has looked different over the last year, so it's hard to really relate it over the pandemic and with everything being shut down, but I'll speak outside of the pandemic and how we're now starting to see some rounding of the corners there, but just the ability to be bedside with a person as they are actively dying. We could be reading poetry, we could be singing songs. There's some death workers that are massage therapists and hold licensing there, so maybe they can come in and do some massage work. We're able to hold space for caregivers and people that are also attending to the dying person. And I think that's actually a huge role too. And I know you see it with hospice, it's not just the actively dying person we're working with, it's the entire family as well. Death workers also handle things as active dying is going on. They can be in that space or they can be removed from. This would all be planned. After death, the death workers can also be in that space as well. This is where we are educating though about, this is not something that's charged for as far as being there and helping the family after death. But things like washing the body or nurturing and tending to, those are also opportunities and options too. So it's kind of interesting because I feel like I could talk about what a death worker does all day long, because each of us, as I'm finding, are doing different things within our practice. But first and foremost, it's the education and getting and talking to people before death is even happening. I'm just going to reach over to my slides here, okay? And if there's any questions too, just feel free. I know there's only a couple, but throw them in the chat or raise your hand. Death workers also support people on getting clear on their beliefs. Within this space, I oftentimes see people that aren't really sure how to even talk about death with their family members or how to say the word death. And so that's an opportunity for either the dying person or the family member to just give us a call, and we can come in and kind of just create that space. That doesn't mean we're coming in and saying, hey, you do this, you do that, you do this. It's more just being available, being willing to talk. Death workers are advocates. So often in home settings, in medical settings, in all of the settings, there's things that just naturally can fall through the cracks. And the person that's dying is dying, and they don't have extra energy to exert in the direction of advocating for themselves. Oftentimes, they don't even know what area to advocate for themselves. So it kind of, as a death worker, we're another set of eyes, another set of hands in the room with the family. There's some death workers that hone into specific populations of marginalized individuals, and there's other death workers that service, people locally within their community. It's so interesting with the amount of death workers rising right now. I use the word rising because we're all kind of being like, "Oh, I'm a death worker. I'm a death worker." We're seeing the individuality that comes along with being a death worker and what each person brings to the practice. On that note, there is no licensing required to become a death worker. There's also no certification right now that's required to be a death worker. So an Indigenous individual that's been practicing and holding space in these ancient ways for the last 40 years is legally, or however, allowed to say it, because there's no licensing around that. I myself am the same way. So there are courses, there are certification programs out there. There's a lot of education also now rising with the amount of death workers rising. But I just like to point that out. It's not mandatory. It is very fluid still. Personally, I have taken a lot of education just because I love that route, but it's not mandatory. And that's kind of intriguing too for people in different communities, different marginalized communities that may have been serving the dying for a lot longer than the rest of us realize. It's good to hold space and know that that's a potential too. We are resources. We can fill in unique roles that sometimes the family doesn't even know that is in existence. I have had so many instances where the person may not feel comfortable sharing something with their family member or the person that's, assigned to be in the room with them. And then us come in with our, our more normal clothing and our maybe softer tone with not a family label to us, and they open up a little bit differently, which is wonderful as well. A lot of times we can come in and say, "Hey, we're not part of the medical team, or we're not part of your family, what is going on?" And then from that information we can go and share it with the team. So it's just, when I look at also how death workers can work alongside hospice, it to me feels very much like that. Another set of hands, another set of eyes. Um, let's see here. Any questions yet popping up? Okay. Some death workers work with animals, and I find that interesting too. So I think what I'd like to do is emphasize just the point that all death workers are not working with elderly, actively dying individuals. Death workers are working with children. Death workers are working with pets, all sorts of different age groups and individuals. Personally, I find what my demographic is 35 to 55, and we are doing a lot with pre-planning, and I love that. That's so encouraging to me, and I know you see it with hospice as well. It's going to be so exciting to know that people in their futures will just be already prepared and already coming with their paperwork, and families will have maybe a little bit better of an idea of what their person wants in these different situations, because as we know, we just can't plan and prepare for everything and know how that's all going to shape up. Then we're all going to die. So it's like we also are saying that message too, let's just get real with the idea that this is something that happens. We are active listeners. There's a lot of times people will call us into the home and say, I don't know what they're talking about, I can't figure it out. And we'll just slide in and sit there, and we'll just be, and we'll allow for that space. And every time I say allow for the space, that's such a big term because it's so much of what we do. It's just being there and being open. And I know I'm a hospice volunteer as well. And I know in that space, going in and just presenting yourself, people have been waiting to talk about death oftentimes and are encouraged that someone's also willing to talk about death. So there's a lot of potential. We are vigil coordinators, and we also educate about rituals. I think a lot of times the word ritual can have connotation, and we like to just really break that down for the person and the individual that's dying. What does ritual mean to you? What rituals have you leaned on? We're not there to put our rituals onto the individual. We are not there to do anything with our personal selves. It's what do you want? What are your rituals? What are your desired feelings for this setting, for this experience? So that's a good point too. We are just there to honor and hold this beautiful, sacred space for the individual, which for so long just hasn't been able to be done to its most best ability, we'll say. How's this doing? How is everyone? Any questions yet? Okay, good. We're also a compassionate presence. I think with family members, as we see caregivers, the burnout is real and they're exhausted, and they've been doing this for years a lot of times, or in intense several weeks or whatever it may be. We can just be that compassionate presence that has come in, that can bring the smiles, maybe bring a little bit of change of energy too, So just know that if you're interested in being a death worker, or if it feels like something is inside saying, yeah, that's for me, there's no one way to do this and no right way. It's just the ability to be soft front, hard back. I think we've heard that one a lot. And I love that soft front, that accepting. And then also, just to have the confidence to know that you can hold that space. We are practical and personal helpers. You'll also see some death workers will do chores of sorts, chores around the home, maybe tasks like grocery shopping. It really depends on the individual and what the family needs, and also the death worker. I think too, on that note, that's why maybe so many of us are rising right now, so that if one person doesn't fulfill that role, another individual can. And I'm already finding this in my practice. There may not be things that I offer, especially now that I'm virtual. And I easily can refer out, hey, so-and-so over here will be able to help you with this, or so-and-so over there does that sort of planning after the death. Some death workers do plan after the death for the individual, wrapping up the affairs and maybe sorting through the mail, something that the partner of the person just doesn't want to do that tedious task or can't emotionally handle such tasks. So it's interesting because we really can cover this spectrum within death, dying, and bereavement. I love it. I keep thinking in my mind, wow, there's just so much that people do, and it's all different. Let's see here. I also just wanted to share a few ways that a death worker can work alongside hospice. And I've said a few things already, but these services, death workers and hospices, are complementary and collaborative. It's part of a team. A death worker is more just an extension of, and someone that could also be a part in. A death worker has the ability to do around the clock care, which can also be nice depending on the family's needs, as well as respite care. We also are able to provide resources, caregiver support, and like I said, those extra eyes and hands. And kind of cool too, the End of Life Doula Advisory Council is now recognized by the National Hospice and Palliative Care Association. So that's wonderful too, because those sorts of little connectors, just like our Barbara Carnes tea that we're going to be, in my live tomorrow with Barbara Carnes and our hospice nurse speaking. I think it's just encouraging to hear how we're all going to start collectively working together, because hospice has been serving the dying for decades and decades now. And there's some areas where still need some support. And we're excited to just be a piece of that puzzle, a small piece of that puzzle. I think a really nice way when you're talking to people about what a death worker or a death doula is, I find, is to compare it to a birth doula or a birth midwife. So often our society accepts those individuals very easily into the mainstream idea of what that worker does. And when I've reached out to people and painted that picture, it becomes a lot easier for maybe those skeptics or whatever to wrap their head around, okay, or even just people that are unsure and don't understand what a death doula is. I know my mom at first is like, what? You're doing what? I think people that aren't used to talking death as I am and as you are, when they start hearing terms like death doula, it really can bring some alarm. So to relate it to what maybe the birthing doulas and the birth midwives are doing is a great way. Really, it's about education and leading with that. What was your reaction, Jessica, when you first heard of the term death doula? Was it?
I actually didn't know too much about it. So I really was wondering what, I didn't have really any education. So I was excited to kind of learn all of this, honestly. I had heard of birth doulas and, birth midwives. So I was wondering if it was the same, but the
Yes.
opposite, of course. So this has been really educational. I can see the, how it could we could collaborate as hospice and death doulas. As really what families and patients need is just support. So the more, honestly, I think the merrier. The more education, the more support, the more hands present, it would make a big difference.
Yes, I love that. I love that too, for that active time
Mm,
and just for myself personally, like I said, to reach people while they're still healthy,
right,
young, and maybe death isn't even in the circle of awareness and care. It's like, let's have
right,
these conversations now.
right. How do you reach people? How do you connect people and start that conversation while they're not thinking of death and dying?
Well, the interesting thing for me personally is I show up on Instagram, and I kind of have used that as my platform to reach, what I once thought was going to be my local community has now become a worldwide community of, hey, people, this is what's going on. And I am actively out there on this platform, and people are receptive. It's been so fascinating to hear, I want to talk about this. I've been wanting to talk about this. I don't know how to talk about this. I have no place to talk about it. People want to talk about death. It is a taboo topic, and all of us are faced with it in numerous different ways. And so, yeah, to then find someone that says, hey, I'm willing to talk about it with you and hold that space for us to talk about it. Yeah, it's been great. So Instagram has been my platform. The way I show up on this space is very open. And that's why earlier, as we began, I invited everyone to join me there. It's a community. And it's really come to this interesting point now where we lean on each other and we support each other. And I can share a post and I can maybe market a piece of education, and others, not myself even, but others will comment and add. And it's really just wonderful. So it's a good place to connect too.
That is awesome. And I connected with you through Instagram, so I know how great your platform is. I enjoy all your posts and what you have to say.
Thank you,
This is
Jessica.
great. And I think it's something that we can learn as hospice workers of, maybe as we're all trying to grow and adjust to everything new, especially this last year brought a lot of challenges. I think considering this as an option to collaborate would be really cool.
Yes, yes, I love it. Like you use the word
Mm,
more, and there's no such thing as too much, is how I believe. At least in this space, in the deaf space,
absolutely.
there's no such thing as too much support.
Well, that
So,
was, I don't know, does anyone else have any other questions? This is recorded and I can send out, like Kate said, the slideshow.
yeah,
But this was really great.
awesome.
Well, thank you. Anything else, Kate?
I don't think so. Like I said, just come follow me on my platform at Cait, Cait deaf doula. And that's a great space to just continue connecting and getting a lot of my downloads and finding out what I'm up to with education.
Great. Well, thank you
Yes.
again so, so much. This will be recorded and on our YouTube page, and I can send out, if you'd like, the link and the slideshow. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Kate.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.